Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm Tanujja Dadlani, Research Analyst at ISS, and I'll be your host for today's episode. We're excited to welcome Dr Imtiaz Ahmed from the Genocide Department, Dhaka University. His research interests include South Asian politics, religion and culture, tolerance and terrorism, refugees and migration, and women and the environment. His publications include Contemporizing Tagore and the World and Women and Militancy, South Asian Complexities. Welcome, Dr. Ahmed. Let's begin.
Sure.
The escalating conflict between Myanmar's military and ethnic armed organizations, EAO, is a matter of concern for both India and Bangladesh, as both countries share borders with Myanmar. In the early months of 2024, civil servants and military personnel from bordering areas in Myanmar escaped fighting and crossed the border into Bangladesh. The conflict in Myanmar has escalated since last October, when a coalition of the Arakan Army, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Taang National Liberation Army launched a joint attack on the Myanmar military units, which subsequently led to the Arakan Army capturing the commercially significant Paletwa town near the India and Bangladesh borders. With increased casualties on the Myanmarese side, a number of Myanmar border security personnel and military personnel have been seeking refuge in Bangladesh and in India's Mizoram. My first question is, Myanmar's military has been witnessing significant conflict with the EAOs. Although this conflict has existed since the junta's takeover since 2021, there is increased an intensity to what is unfolding now. Why are we witnessing an escalation in the conflict since last year?
Well, a couple of things. One is one should not take Myanmar to be a typical Westphalian state. Its sovereignty was always fluid, in the sense that Tatmadaw, or the main Burman Majoritarian community, did not have hold on areas as normal modern state would have. So you had ethnic armed organizations, some of them, 8 or 10 of them out of 135, are very powerful, and they have their own military units. Some have their own flags. Some even have their own currencies. So it's not a typical modern state that one should, when analyzing Myanmar, one should not look at Myanmar as a typical modern state. So what happened this time was with, if you can say, the decline of Aung San Suu Kyi, or maybe when she was interned for the second time, I would say, you have a serious conflict within the Majoritarian Burman community. It happened way back earlier also, but that time Aung San Suu Kyi pledged non-violence. But this time her party, you have NUG now, National Unity Government in Exile, and of course it has now a militant wing called PDF. Now this NUG PDF per se is from the majority community. So you have the majority community getting divided. One, you have the Tatmadaw and you have the NUG PDF. Now in this division or polarization, the several ethnic armed organizations, they are taking advantage of making their power known to Tatmadaw and also to NUG, I believe. So whoever wins or whoever emerges, victorious in this conflict, these ethnic armed organizations will have a better way of bargaining. Now, of course, there are external actors who are supporting some of these ethnic armed organizations. The Three Brotherhood Alliance, that one you were mentioning, where you have the Arakan Army, they had a good kind of a negotiation with Tatmadaw, which also emboldened them, and they could understand that this is the time they should, raise their stakes and get as much territory as possible. So what is happening is the ethnic armed organizations are also vying for bigger pie, if you can say. So when the conflict will eventually end, one way or other, they will have better, what you call, means to negotiate with the central government in the context of their autonomy or sovereignty, whatever you say. So it's a diffuse sovereignty. Now this is interesting because these ethnic armed organizations are not asking for independence. They're not claiming independence. What they are looking for is much more bigger autonomy, and it can be many things. I guess the conflict that we are now witnessing is that level. So one has to wait and see which part of majority community, whether it's NUG or PDF or the Tatmadaw, whichever, who is winning. So once we know that, we would know what would be their bargaining position with the ethnic armed organizations.
The challenges emerging in Myanmar have consequences across its neighborhood. The border with China is largely under rebel control. ASEAN is actively trying to engage and encourage a political solution, while Thailand manages fighting at its borders. How do you look at the implications for this conflict on South Asia?
It's a good question. I don't think ASEAN would be able to do much, given they have some of the countries have their own interest in Myanmar, particularly the kind of investments. One or two research that has really looked into the investment has seen some of the ASEAN countries' investment going up after the fall of Aung San Suu Kyi. One of the countries is Singapore, actually, whose investment has really gone up. But more importantly, I think South Asian countries, including China, could play a bigger role. Now, one reason for that is this is one conflict which has, of course, impacted on Bangladesh, no doubt, but it has also impacted on India, particularly in the Mizoram area. And as you have pointed out, some of the security officials and security forces, they took shelter in India as they took shelter in Bangladesh. Given that context, there is now a sense of commonality between Bangladesh, India, and even China, I would say, because the more the conflict, if it increases and if you have a greater conflict, you will have external powers coming and meddling. And we see that to some extent with the United States putting their Burma Act on the table, which makes it clear, clearly points out that if the U.S. president thinks that, that something really terribly happening, the president can actually be more flexible in supporting some of the ethnic armed organizations, including NUG, PADF. And if that is the case, definitely China would not want the United States to come to this part of the world. Similarly, India would also not want, because of the Northeast situation in the Northeast, because they have a serious insurgency issues there. So there is a now commonality, ironically, I would say, between India and China on the issue of Myanmar. And we have seen over the years that these two countries actually have voted together whenever Myanmar case came in the United Nations. They were always together. They're also together when it comes to Ukraine, but that's the other thing. So here is a kind of opportunity between Bangladesh, India and China to work together and revive something which 10 years back they had something called BCIM, Bangladesh, China, India and Myanmar. But that BCIM was more geared towards economic, kind of cooperation, and it did not go anywhere. But the point now is 10 years back and 10 years now the situation has changed radically. Globally, you now have a more multipolar world emerging in a big way. So now I think there's an opportunity for these three countries to revive the BCIM. Well, first the BCI and then get Myanmar on board as well. Because these three countries would definitely want stability and not instability. So from that point of view, I think this commonality is something which might work. And then the ASEAN countries might get also interested if they see China and India working together on the issue of Myanmar. I think they will also feel confident and comfortable also, because they would know that stability is something that they also want, and that stability would also help their investment. So I think the ASEAN countries would also be very positive if something of that kind emerges out of this conflict that we now see in Myanmar.
The fighting between EAOs and the military are happening across the border from both India and Bangladesh, who share a porous border with Myanmar. How is Bangladesh responding to the Myanmar military troops fleeing to Bangladesh?
Well, there has been two situations where Bangladesh government very quickly made arrangements to send them back. There were some discussions on whether they would be, they'll keep them for a while and negotiate. But I think government rightly, came out with a quick solution and said, no, we don't want them here. They took shelter because mainly to save their life from the conflict. And so on humanitarian grounds, they were very quickly sent back, both on the first time and the second time. The first time it was around 330 of them, and in the second round also of the similar number. So I think, and they followed this pattern with with India. India did the same thing when some of the Tatmadaw forces took shelter in Mizoram. India very quickly helicoptered them and got them back. So I think, as I say, there's some commonality here also with India and Bangladesh thinking in the same light. And similar thing happened also in China, don't forget. They also did the same thing. So I guess that would be the pattern. So if anybody wants to take shelter, which is fine, but I think Bangladesh should be happy to repatriate them as quickly as possible.
Bangladesh has made firm statements that it will not accept any more Rohingya refugees. In a Rohingya-dominated town in Myanmar, the Arakan Army has warned residents to leave ahead of a planned offensive. How does this unfolding situation complicate the Rohingya crisis?
Well, it does, no doubt, but their case is complicated anyway. But the difference between 2017 and 2024 is, in 2017 there was a clear case of the military making what some would say, including ICJ would say, a genocidal intent. That is not there now. Yes, there are Rohingyas who wants to take shelter in Bangladesh, but that's largely because of the conflict between Tatmadaw and Arakan Army, and not something which we saw back in 2017, targeted killing of the Rohingyas and all. So there's a difference between the two. And since on the Bangladesh side it's already saturated, and which is very clear because Bangladesh also shifted some of the Rohingya refugees to Bhasan Chor, to an island. Well, eventually they want to shift around 90,000 plus, but still, one can easily see Bangladesh doesn't have the space. But more importantly, I think that this is not a case of what happened back in 2017. So it's a different case altogether. So I think more attention ought to be, or pressure ought to be brought onto Myanmar rather than anywhere else to resolve this issue. And I think there are ways to do that. So I don't think Bangladesh this time would open the border as they did back in 2017.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion, Dr. Ahmed. You have been listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at iss.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates from our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.